time in Sydney's past, in the post-World War II years of the late 1940s and 50s, when the sound of bongos, beat poetry, folk music and passionate debate echoed across the city. Sydney was a much smaller world, and it was easier to identify an intellectual subculture, in this case, the self-proclaimed Sydney Push, a libertarian movement which would persist through to the early 70s.
Many beats ago, in a tiny workshop on the outskirts of Boobabadao, an old daddy sat fashioning from fine teak a set of bongos, very small yet very frantic.
In the late 50s and 60s, the conversation over coffee tables changed to equal rights, censorship, ban the bomb, and later the rights and wrongs of the Vietnam War. The music changed too, for it was the sound of folk music that best accompanied talk of protest and social change. The late 70s witnessed more changes as pub rock shattered the conversation. Television also seized the minds of the masses as Australia quickly moved from a nation of people who once entertained each other to a people who got entertained, mainly from television. Even hotels installed television sets, sealing the fate of both conversation and music. The Sydney Push, possibly taking its name from the rebellious larrikin street gangs of the past, who called their gangs pushers, was a fluid clan of left-wing intellectuals and philosophers, mostly arts and philosophy students, rebels and creatives who frequented Sydney coffee shops and pubs. There was no real membership to the Push. People floated in and out, just like their conversations knew no boundaries. They bonded through rejection of conventional morality and conformity. Consistent members included Clive James, Jim Baker, Eva Cox, Margaret Fink, Harry Hooton, Robert Hughes, John Olsen, Jermaine Greer, Paddy McGuinness, Wendy Bacon, Lillian Roxon, Jill Neville and Frank Morehouse, and many others who floated in and out and around about. Gatherings of the Push meant hours of debate and discussion over endless cups of coffee or glasses of wine and beer. One wit described it as critical drinking.
Where do you think I have been all the day? Boozing, jolly well boozing.
Folk music was impromptu and often raucous, including endless bawdy song sessions. Occasional singers included Beth Scher, Don Henderson, Bill Berry, Brian Mooney, Marion Henderson, Gary Shearston, Terry Driscoll, Don Ayrton and Declan Apley. One bawdy song, sung by Apley, Professor John Glaister, was supposedly written by John Anderson, Professor of Philosophy at Sydney Uni, and another about Vincent van Gogh's sexual exploits written by painter John Olsen. The Sydney Push coincided with the arrival of the Beat Generation. In 1959, the Australian Women's Weekly announced, over the past 2 years, something new has appeared on the Sydney scene, the Beat Generation. They're not deadbeat or beat up, they feel the beat in cool jazz, folk music or a gutty rock number, and they dig things in a bohemian way. Most of Sydney's beatniks agree with Jack Kerouac, author of On the Road, and spokesman for America's Beat Generation, that anyone from 15 to 50 can be a beat, as long as he digs everything. Call them another lost generation, call them junior existentialists, call them beatniks, they're still the most colourful band of scatterbrained adolescents ever to appear in Sydney. Others suggested true beatniks used fashion or non-fashion as a statement of individuality. Duffel coats were de rigueur, and they had to have toggle fastenings. The Australian Women's Weekly continued, besides duffel coats, the boys wear desert boots, often referred to as brothel creepers, corduroys, polo neck jumpers and sported beards. The girls have long dramatic faces, if possible, and wear their hair either long and unbrushed to their shoulders or caught up in a bird's nest effect in a do-it-yourself without a mirror Empire style. Beatniks were seen as the bane of coffee shop proprietors because they'd sit for hours over one cup of coffee where they thought deep thoughts or discussed deep thoughts, or they just sat. Taking a cue from TV's Bob Denver, who portrayed a beatnik on TV's The Many Loves of Dobie Gillis and later Gilligan's Island, you certainly didn't have to be an intellectual to be a beat. The Bibles of the beats included Joyce Carey's The Horse's Mouth, George Orwell's Down and Out in Paris and London, and of course Kerouac On the Road. Beatniks were supposed to dig the current paintings and current folk songs and sprinkle their conversations with erudite references to these books, paintings, jazz and folk music. The Royal George in Sussex Street was the most infamous drinking haunt of the push and the beats. It offered an intellectual camaraderie, informal folk singing and a bohemian old-style pub ambience. The Liberty Coffee Shop in Rose Street in the CBD was the other favourite. Rose Street was a city lane running alongside the Australia Hotel between Pitt and Castlereagh Streets. In its heydays from the late 1800s to the 1970s, it was bustling with bookshops, restaurants, cafes, fashion, music and other specialty retailers. It had a distinct European flavour. In 1973, in a decade of architectural vandalism, it came tumbling down to the wrecking ball, along with the old Theatre Royal and Sydney's elegant Hotel Australia, to make room for the MLC Centre. Author Isidore Brodsky in 1962 painted a picture of what Rose Street must have been like. Rose Street is the street of the savant employing each of the five senses to understand thoroughly what it is to be tasted, savoured and slowly enjoyed in art and literature, in theatre and music, in legend and fact, and anecdotal bric-a-brac. Always interested in any fresh expression in art and earnest to encourage it. At the Lincoln Cafe, with its goldfish windows, poets recited, folk singers sung, often from the Lincoln's own songbook, and everything was, to use the word of the day, cool.
I'm gonna tell you, baby, move away from here. Gonna stop that Iceman, gonna buy me a Frigidaire. I'm gonna move way out in the outskirts.
Lee Gordon was the biggest music promoter in the country at the time, and he presented the big shows at the old Sydney Stadium at Rushcutters Bay. In 1959, Gordon, never slow to pick a trend, recorded, to use his own words, a groovy single, She's the Ginchiest, for his lead-on record label.
Even though her home's in old Paddo, she's the ballinest chick that you'll ever know. She's the Ginchiest.
Barry Crocker was another who got in on the act. He cut Beatnik Baby.
Oh yeah, oh yeah. She's my beatnik baby. She's my beatnik.
A song that waxed lyrical about a girlfriend who only longed for coffee and jazz. Another to put a stream of beatnik consciousness down on vinyl was DJ John Burles, who recorded the Little Beat Bongos with the help of Terry Bissica on bongos. As if heralding the end of the beat generation, the folk revival and the Sydney push in 1972, three of the world's most famous beat poets visited Sydney for performances: Allen Ginsberg, Lawrence Ferlinghetti and the Russian poet Voznesensky. Adrian Rawlins, a much-loved eccentric poet and personality, compared the performances. One of the shows at the Sydney Conservatorium got out of control, led by artist Brett Whiteley, who loudly expressed his boredom with Ferlinghetti's poetry. Whiteley and three others were arrested for offensive behaviour. The sound of bongos faded away.
And it's cheer up, me lads, let your heart never fail, for the bonny ship the Diamond goes fishing for the whale.
Folk music experienced a decade of widespread popularity between 1955 and 1965. It was played on radio, television and in concert, influenced by major recording artists like Pete Seeger, Burl Ives, Odetta, the Kingston Trio, the Weavers, Ewan MacColl and A.L. Lloyd. Australian artists at the time sang British ballads, English, Scots and Irish folk songs, and some Australian folk songs, which typically were described as bush songs. The leading performers of the era included Gary Shearston, Martin Wyndham Reed, Declan Affley, Marion Henderson, Lionel Long, Colin Dryden, Brian Mooney, Alex Hood, Danny Spooner and Tina Lawton. In the 1970s, the Larrikins and the Bushwhackers Band led another revival, often with bush dancing. In 1970, Sydney hosted the 4th National Folk Festival, an initiative which had started in Melbourne in 1967 with the Port Phillip Folk Festival. Sydney's festival was called the Port Jackson Folk Festival and attracted thousands to venues across Sydney. The success of the festival, both artistically and financially, led to the establishment of the Folk Federation of New South Wales, a not-for-profit organisation which in 2020 celebrated its 50th anniversary. This same organisation staged the 2019 Sydney Folk Festival and the 2020 Sydney Folk Festival at Home Virtual Festival. Over the years, Sydney has been home for numerous folk clubs, many taking the name of the hotel they were held in, including the Elizabeth Folk Club, the Folk Attic, the Edinburgh Castle, the Royal George, the Maitland and Morpeth, the Loaded Dog, the Shack, Packed Folk and the Troubadour. Today, folk music is increasing in popularity, along with the desire for the organic over the urban. The words folk music now represent many musical expressions which can be found in Sydney. It's a big, colourful and generous description covering traditional music, world music, blues, bluegrass and beyond, and most importantly, original and traditional songs that tell stories about our country and our city. The beat goes on.